Well, good morning, folks. George Adventure here today. Glad y'all can be with me today. So I was watching a video from Terry's Knives and Man Stuff, and he told an old story about his family and all, and I love to hear that stuff. I like to hear them stories. So he kind of inspired me. So I'm gonna do today on Monday's talk, Monday inspirational talk. I'm gonna do a talk, and I'm gonna do it about my pawpaw. Now, which my pawpaw was my mama's dad, and you can guess what my grandmother's name is. It was married to her, Mama. We live in the South, so pawpaw and Mama. But they were, I didn't know my pawpaw. I didn't know him. I was 2 years old, and when he died. He was 44 years old when he died. I was actually in the bed with him taking a nap because he used to watch me. Because he'd work, because they were poor, and he'd work odd jobs and stuff like that. And my mother worked for Bell. She was Southern Bell when she was married to my dad. And I was 2 years old, and that was in '62. So I'm giving away my age. But, so yeah, he died in '62, and he was 44 years old. So, but my mother would tell me that he really loved me, and he liked to watch me and carried me around with him all the time and toted me around, and so she always told me how much I was, how much she, that he reminds me of me, how I'm a lot like him, and just my mannerisms and all, which I don't know. That's just what my my daddy tells me the same thing, but I wished I could have known him, because you think he was 44 years old. He was young. That's young. And I was in the bed with him taking a nap, and he sat up, and he had a massive heart attack and fell on the floor. Well, they didn't know CPR back then. They didn't know as much about hearts, and the medical community didn't either. So he died, and my grandmother, which is my mama, and I was close to her, she come running in there, and all you could do is get the phone number and call an ambulance, But I know back then, like they didn't go to the funeral home. They put his casket with his body in it in the living room at their house, Thank God we don't do that no more. But I don't know, I don't know if that's just a Southern tradition, or that's people back in them days did it all over the country, but they called it setting up with the dead, so I think he stayed in there like 3 days or something. So, but anyway, so he my pawpaw was they said he was a pretty rough character. And I don't mean rough by being a criminal, and just, he was a hard man, but he took care of his family. He worked hard, he's, did a lot of extra jobs and stuff. So, they would tell me about that, and they would be my mother, my daddy, my aunt Betty, which is my mother's sister, and I was close to her, and my uncle. We called him Big Joe. He was my pawpaw's son. Reminded me a lot of my pawpaw, just the way people talk. But they would tell me stories about him, and so I love to hear a good story, especially about my pawpaw that I didn't really know. Now when they have saved some of his stuff, and like his Masonic stuff. He was a master mason. He was a mason. And in the lodge, they lived in Bolton, Georgia, which isn't far from where I'm sitting right now. And it's, or, some people call it Riverside or Hangtown or whatever. And it's a little community that's on the Chattahoochee. And it's not far from here. It's in the Atlanta city limits. But back then, it was a lot different. It was just different back then. Atlanta was really a nice place to be. But so they lived there, and my mother and her sister and her two brothers. So they've told me stories, and so my uncle was telling me a story about him. He was working a job. I don't know if it was in a little restaurant or whatever, cleaning, just doing whatever, just an odd and end job, he'd had. And there was a guy that was in there. I think it was like just a diner, you know, where you could walk up and sit at the bar or sit at the tables, kind of like the Waffle House. But it wasn't a Waffle House. But there was a guy in there, and him and his wife was arguing, and my papa was, I think, wiping stuff down, cleaning stuff. And my papa, according to them, always carried a 380 in his pocket, a little 380 auto in his pocket. Just, you know, no holster, just put the 380 in his pocket. They had that and a pocket knife in there. God, I would love to have his pocket knife. So he had the 380, and so this dude starts beating on his wife in there, gets her on the, or his girlfriend or whatever it was, gets her on the floor and is beating her. Said my papa jumped over the counter and pulled that pistol out and pointed it at him and pulled the trigger, and the pistol just clicked, and the shell misfired. So he cocked it again. Well, the guy gets up and runs out of the restaurant, and of course they help that lady out. Well, my papa runs out there, and so the guy runs over and gets in his truck, Ford truck. That's what they said, but it's what my uncle said. And so my papa grabbed this glass Coke bottle, you know, the one they used to get that was, you know, it was full of Coke, and the guy come barreling by him, and he threw it, and he busted the windshield out of the truck, and he wrecked his truck. The guy did. So my papa went over and got him out and all that. Back then, you could do that, you know. You didn't have to worry about getting locked up. So, you know, he died when he was 44 years old, and he was in the bed. He used to keep me some, because my mama said he loved me to come over there and stuff, and he'd carry me around everywhere, you know, and just, you know, just loved on me and stuff. And so he wanted to take a nap. So me and him laid down to take a nap, and I was 2 years old at the time. And it was in 1962. So I'm telling you my age. He laid me down. Well, he sat up in the bed, and he'd had a heart attack, and he fell in the floor. And my mama, which, you know, we called them mamas, she was in the kitchen. You know, she basically stayed in the kitchen all the time. So she run in there, and he was laying on the floor dead, you know. And back then they didn't do CPR. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't teach it or anything like we do now. But so, you know, they buried him. They actually brought him back to the living room, the casket, and they called it Sitting Up with the Dead. And I'm glad we don't do that no more. Yeah, I'm just not doing that. So they put his casket in the living room, and people would come visit. You know, they didn't do the funeral home. People would come visit and stuff, and they'd have food sitting out everywhere and all that good stuff. And you know, I don't remember him, but I have his Masonic stuff. You know, I have his Masonic Bible, his certificate. I've got a big picture of him, you know, and I've got a couple pictures of him, because I was a Mason, and I was raised in the same lodge that he was 40 years later, exactly 40 years later. He was raised in 48, and I was raised in 88. So, you know, and I think about him often. I didn't meet him, or I was 2 years old, didn't carry on the conversation, you know. But I've heard a lot of stories about him, you know. And one of the stories was you know, my daddy tells me a lot of stories, you know, and my daddy and my uncle told me this one about my mom and daddy, when they got married, they just moved right down the road, and there was just a little apartment complex in Bolton, you know, not very many. Well, my mom and my daddy lived there. My daddy worked night shifts and for Atlanta Transit, which is MARTA now. So my mama would be there by herself. Well, they called them peeping Toms back then. You know, I guess a pervert or whatever. But he would, in this apartment complex, he would look in the windows and stuff. Look in your window, basically. That's why they called them peeping Toms. So my papa told my daddy, he said, well, I'll stay over there with her some. So, you know, he stayed there, and so he ended up he ended up catching the dude looking in the window of my mama's apartment. So he slid around, and according to my daddy, you know, just what my daddy tells me, he got the guy, and he pretty much beat the you know what out of him, and didn't ever have any problems. You know, he never came back because my pawpaw beat the crap out of him, I guess you'd say. You know, and that's one of them deals back in them days, you know, old school stuff. You just took care of business yourself. And I can't say that I wouldn't have done the same thing, you know, because it's ridiculous. But so, yeah, my pawpaw put a stop to it, and they never had any more trouble. But he was you know, they said he was a gentleman, you know, and my daddy'd say he'd be driving down the road with him. Well, my daddy wouldn't be driving, pawpaw'd be driving, and my daddy'd be sitting over there in the which my daddy was his son-in-law, and he'd be sitting over there in the passenger seat, and my pawpaw would grab his leg and start laughing and squeeze it, and he'd say, man, he'd squeeze my leg and it hurt, and he'd laugh and cut up. But, you know, I wished I would have known him. You know, I've just heard so many stories about him, and you know, I think he was a man's man pretty much, and just, you know, like I said, they were dirt poor. My mom and them was raised dirt poor, and she never liked me saying that, but she's the one that told me that, you know. But, you know, they just had to do things different back then, you know, to survive. But, you know, they made sure, you know, my mama and my uncles and my aunt all had meals and food and clothes, and, you know, he'd work a bunch of jobs and stuff. My mama didn't work, so he'd work different jobs and stuff, take care of his family like men should do. But, you know, it's just one of them stories that I kind of hold in here near and dear to me, and you know, it's sad that, you know, I didn't know him. I wished I would have. I've got his, you know, I said, I've got his Masonic stuff, you know. They don't know what happened to his ring, you know, but, you know, who knows. But, you know, I would have liked to have known him personally, but I was just 2, so. And I can't even remember him except for the pictures I look at. So, you know, that's that story. So, and I may follow up one next week. I can tell stories all day. You know, I've always been kind of a storyteller. Not a lying story, but just a good story. So anyways, I'm carrying a Micarta Bearhead Trapper today. Got it from DLT. If you've never carried one of these, man, this is a great everyday carry knife. Great EDC knife. Got this Micarta on it. You know, a lot of people don't like Micarta, but I do. And it's just a great, durable carry knife. And you can guess the other one I've got on. I got in my pocket. Got my Saudi. And this is the Smoky Mountain Sunset, Sunrise, whichever. Got it, you know, Smoky Mountain Knife Works came out with it. I think it's just considered a persimmon orange, but it's, you know, smoky. I think it's called Smoky Valley Sunset. Beautiful knife, thick bone. I love carrying it. Got my Benchmade bug out today, right here. I got this nice bead from RDS, wood turning and acrylics, wood turning and acrylics. RDS wood turning and acrylics. So I got this bead, beautiful bead, matches my bug out pretty good. So yeah, I've got the bug out on me today. Still my favorite, you know, modern, but they're just getting too pricey. But anyway, I hope y'all have a great day. I hope you enjoyed the story. It's day after Easter. Blessed. God woke me up again today. He let me have another day. Listened to the birds and come into work. He got me to work safe. and hopefully he'll get me home safe to Miss Linda. I appreciate the blessings he gives me. And y'all have a safe day and a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.